Robert Daly is director of the Wilson Center's Kissinger Institute on the United States and China. He joins us to discuss a number of things, including a follow-up to President Xi's visit. Last time you were here, it was before the visit. Now the visit has come and gone, and a major state visit somewhat upstaged by the Pope.
Got upstaged the front end by the Pope, and then on Friday, which should have been Xi Jinping's day, this was when we had the announcement that John Boehner was resigning. It was unfortunate that the American reporters who were in the Rose Garden to cover the Obama-Xi press conference spent all of their time with President Obama asking for his response on the Boehner resignation. And I think that the president blew a chance to earn huge points, at least with the Chinese viewers, by saying it's not very often that we get to stand next to the leader of China. Let's get back to Boehner later.
So do you think that the general perception in China was this was somewhat of a slight?
No, I think that this wasn't reported in China. I spent last week in China and spent a lot of time talking about this. It was recorded there from beginning to end as a resounding success. And in many ways, it was a successful visit. So not to take anything away from that. But it was reported as glorious, as giving China the respect that it deserved. And then, most interestingly, it was reported in China that President Obama had reaffirmed our joint commitment to this pet phrase of Xi Jinping's, the new model of major power relations, which I'm quite sure did not happen during the summit. But nevertheless, it was reported as a resounding victory.
The cap and trade announcement came at somewhat as a surprise. Talk to us about that.
Well, we knew that something was going to come on climate change because this was a major talking point and a major surprise, in fact, during last November 2014 summit in Beijing, which surpassed low expectations at the time. And so we knew that at this summit there would be some sort of advancing of that agenda in order to have a joint win in the upcoming talks on climate change in Paris. And so the specifics of China's cap and trade, and there are some questions about the feasibility of that because it has very high technical requirements. But nevertheless, a big step forward, and it's come out of our joint discussion, so it bodes well for the Paris talks in November.
And what does it tell us about China's desire to play a leading role in addressing this environmental issue?
It tells us a lot about China's desire to work with the United States constructively in a win-win way, which is the way Xi Jinping puts it when it can, and about its desire to be seen as a responsible international player, international power generally. I think this was Xi Jinping's great theme. He had clearly heard a lot of the concerns from the United States and other countries, and his announcements in both in Seattle and at the UN General Assembly all involved China's emergence as a non-free rider, as a constructive player in a number of major international spheres, including fighting diseases. The Ebola example was used a lot, including alleviating climate change problem and bringing an enormous amount of capacity to bear, billions of dollars that he announced throughout the world for poverty alleviation. And so this was his stepping forward to make it clear that China can make a positive difference in world orders as well as international public goods. This was his major message.
A touchy subject, cybersecurity, addressed to some degree. Unpack that for us. Was satisfactory progress made from the U.S. perspective? Well, how does China view the issue?
As President Obama said, we'll have to see what happens next. There are a whole lot of shoes that could fall on either side of this issue. The administration had announced that it was considering imposing sanctions against Chinese individuals and corporations who had benefited from Chinese cyber theft of American corporate secrets. They made this announcement several weeks before Xi was supposed to come. Xi then sent his top man to the United States to try to fend that off, and apparently those conversations went well enough. They announced at this summit that neither side would condone or in any way tolerate cyber espionage of corporate secrets. Now, from Chinese point of view, this is something that China swears it has never done anyway. So it's a promise never to engage in this behavior again. If you're going to look at it cynically, you would hearken back to a lot of Chinese positions about intellectual property theft throughout the 1980s and the 1990s. And the position whenever China got caught with its hand in the cookie jar was, we have never done this, we never would do this, we frown on this, and as long as you don't impose sanctions, we promise to never do it again. And it continues to happen.
We've never done it, but we'll never do it again.
Right, and it gets worse with more tools. At the same time, this was the first time that China accepted the American distinction between cyber espionage for commercial purposes and cyber espionage of the more traditional sort aimed at national security. So accepting that distinction is it pushes one pawn, perhaps one square forward at most.
Will it require eventually a formal agreement versus just rhetorical agreement?
We're a long way away from that. And it doesn't involve only the United States and China,
right,
of course. But at least we have started up the dialogue again. It would appear, although there haven't been really substantive discussions going forward yet. And China has accepted this distinction, which they had been saying was a distinction without a difference. Nevertheless, this is an agreement not to do something that both sides claim, for different reasons, that they never did in the first place. And so on the game goes. We'll see what happens, down the next few months.
Well, I want to ask you about something that occurred since the visit, the Trans-Pacific Partnership.
Right.
What are the implications?
Well, we're going to have to see what's in it, and we're going to have to see whether the United States Congress can actually pass it. My sense is that it will eventually pass, but that it will pass ugly. It's going to pass at the 11th hour with a lot of griping and some changes along the way, and it's going to be a heavy lift for the White House. The news to date, it's been reported by some, including by the Wall Street Journal, as a major blow to China. I think that is a wrong interpretation. It certainly would have been a blow to the United States' prestige in Asia-Pacific and a blow to its claims about the rebalance to Asia if we failed at any point to advance TPP. But this is not necessarily a loss for China in the long run, because China is now interested perhaps in joining a few years down the line, and it may even want to use TPP requirements and provisions to push forward reforms within China that the government wants to make anyway, but feels in some cases that it has the leverage to push forward on its own. China used WTO accession in the same way, and so I don't see this yet as a loss for China. It doesn't necessarily harm China's own attempts to set up a free trade agreement, for example, with South Korea or Japan, but it would have been a big defeat for the United States to have it fail vis-a-vis China. And if it fails going forward, it will also be a defeat for the United States in Asia. Now, that's a non-economic argument for passing an economic agreement, but that's almost always the case with these free trade agreements.
And finally, Robert, what do we have to look forward to? What are the next big touchstones in this relationship between the United States and China?
I think there's a short honeymoon period following this summit. One of the greatest successes of the summit is it, for the time being, has arrested this downward slide in relations, which had been gathering momentum over the past 2 years or so, really since Xi Jinping took over. Clearly, both sides now want to take a step back and see if they can put the relationship on a more constructive footing. And they have a number of opportunities coming up in the fall calendar. There are a couple of regional meetings in Asia that are going to be important, and the Paris climate change meetings. Still, they didn't address the fundamental differences that run very deep. We've discussed the security dilemma that we faced in the Western Pacific a couple of times. That hasn't yet been addressed. So we'll see how long the honeymoon period lasts and whether both sides are able to really mobilize their bureaucracies to take advantage of it.
And I'm going to squeeze in a final question. Often with these relationships, we can either overestimate or underestimate the personal rapport between the players. What do we know about the relationship between Barack Obama and Xi Jinping? Is there any reason to believe that they've connected in a meaningful way?
I see no reason to believe that they've connected personally in a meaningful way, but they have met more than any previous United States president has met with his Chinese counterpart, and that has been meaningful. Whether or not it's personal, I think we can set that aside. That's maybe something for the society pages. There's no evidence that they really have a roll-up-the-shirt sleeves buddy-buddy relationship. There's also no evidence that it matters that they don't have that. They did make progress at this summit.
Great. Thanks, Robert, as always.
Thank you.